Today we return to the hell that is the YA community. As you might recall from the Blood Heir controversy, the YA community is very hot to destroy, especially new authors, but really just any authors. And I'm not entirely sure why. They seem particularly proud of destroying people they think are not writing books correctly, which, is subjective. Oh, you didn't write this character how I want this character to be portrayed? Your life should be ruined. It's pretty much the motto of the YA community. And it's now being noticed by The Guardian. Earlier this week, The Guardian posted this article called Torn Apart, The Vicious War Over Young Adult Books. Let's see what they've dug up on this issue. Earlier this month, the author and screenwriter Garth Roberts announced that his story was being removed from the forthcoming Doctor Who anthology. Having been shown Roberts' past tweets about transgender people, BBC Books said that his views conflict with our values as a publisher. At least one of the book's other contributors, Susie Day, had promised to withdraw from the project if Roberts were included. Quote, "I raised my concerns and said if he was in, I was out," said Day. This is a very dangerous place to get into right here with the conflict with our values. So if I'm to assume BBC Books would publish something like Hannibal Lecter, am I to assume that they would agree with the ideas that are inside of Hannibal Lecter as a whole? As author myself, every character that I put in my book does not necessarily reflect my personal values. In fact, you usually have to have opposing values in order to have a book because you have to have conflict. Now, why people are going for the, you've written a racist character, so now you must be racist, but then completely ignoring all the other non-racist characters and or ignoring the person, the character arc of that character who becomes less racist or whatever, if that is the thing as is what happened in The Black Witch. I don't know. I don't know how they choose, but I guess it might be slightly different than that because it's saying we don't agree with the values of our author, and that's equally as dangerous because what views of authors that you have published are you unaware of? And apparently now everything that somebody subcontracted to you, you have to agree with. Since when? I don't even agree with all of my friends on just about everything. So why does a publisher think that they have to agree with everyone underneath them? This is very draconian. A few days later at the Hay Festival, the Irish author John Boyne had described a campaign against his own book, My Brother's Name is Jessica, about a boy and his trans sister. He was insulted on Twitter for his appearance and his sexuality. Like Roberts, he is gay but not trans. Some critics proposed a boycott of Boyne's novel, which was not withdrawn. Others made veiled threats to his safety. Quote, "I don't feel it's my job as a reader or a writer to tell anyone what they can or can't write," Boyne said. "We are supposed to use our imaginations to put ourselves into the minds and the bodies of others." The campaign against Roberts and Boyne are not new or isolated. Since March, I've been sending discreet messages to authors of young adult fiction. I approached 24 in several countries, all writing in English. In total, 15 authors replied, of whom 11 to talk to me either by email or by phone. Well, 11 agreed to talk to me. 2 subsequently withdrew, in one case following professional advice. 2 have received death threats, and 5 would only talk if I concealed their identities. This is not what normally happens when you ask a writer for an interview. But things aren't normal in YA right now. In January, a Chinese-American author, Emile Zhao, withdrew her forthcoming fantasy novel, Blood Heir, and apologized for the way it handled slavery, which she said was based on the Asian experience, not the American one. Zhao had found an agent during a Twitter pitching event for authors from marginalized groups, but as Ellen O., co-founder of the campaign group We Need Diverse Books, explained in a tweet, "You're not immune to charges of racism just because you are a person of color. Racism is systematic, especially anti-blackness." Zhao described the reaction to her debut as devastating and now plans to release an amended version in November. Shouldn't have bent at the knee. It's not going to make him happy. Another of Zhao's critics was Kosako Jackson, whose own debut novel, A Place for Wolves, about a romance between two teenage boys, during the Kosovo War, was scheduled to release in March. Jackson is black and gay and a professional sensitivity reader, which means he reads books before publication and offers advice on how they handle matters of identity. Yet on the 22nd of February, he was accused of insensitivity for allegedly minimizing suffering of Albanian Muslims. Quote, "I've never been so disgusted in my life," said the first review to make this point on the reading community website Goodreads.com. On 25th of February, comments below the review began to discuss sending an open letter to Jackson's publisher. On 28 February, he posted a note apologizing to those who I hurt with my words and withdrew the book. In April, the British YA author Zoe Marriott was widely accused of cultural appropriation for writing a Chinese-inspired fantasy novel called The Hand, the Eye, and the Heart. These are the latest battles in a war that seems to be escalating over who should control the way that people from marginalized communities appear in YA fiction. In August 2016, the Mexican-American author E. Charlatan Trujillo's novel When We Were Fierce was delayed after several bloggers criticized its attempt to capture the voice of a black teenager. It has still not been published, and it is not mentioned on Charlatan Trujillo's website. In months that followed, 3 speculative fiction novels, The Black Witch by Laurie Frost, American Heart by Laura Moriarty, and The Continent by Kiera Drake, attracted protests for their alleged racist content. Forrest published regardless and with great success, despite campaign of 1-star reviews and emails to the publisher. Moriarty published too, although Kirkus magazine, which had defended The Black Witch, downgraded and revised its review of American Heart because it said the article fell short of meeting the standards for clarity and sensitivity. Drake, however, was convinced by her critics, 455 of whom signed a petition demanding that The Continent, a racist garbage fire, according to one fellow author, be delayed to allow additional editorial focus. A substantially revised version appeared in March 2018. And the most important thing to take away from this paragraph is that The Black Witch by Laurie Forrest was still published without changes and still met great success. Look, these people on social media, when they throw a fit, is they make it look like a bigger deal and it's going to be a big financial ruin if you publish something that they don't like, but it's only a ghost. People on Twitter literally have no power, and the majority of the country doesn't pay attention to the dramas that happen on Twitter. So you might have these 455 people who are signing some petition to not purchase a book. How many other people do you think are out there who are going to be interested in this novel? A lot more people than these insane ones who were never interested in the book to begin with, and even if you make changes, they're not going to purchase the book. They already hate your character. The YA community is a much tighter group than the scattered loners who write adult fiction. Young adult means books suitable for readers aged 12 to 18, and the grown-ups who write them exhibit en masse the same idealism and energy, the defiance and conformity, and the love of social media for which teenagers are famous. Spend time weaving through the Twitter feeds of YA bloggers and authors, and you'll find a supportive atmosphere for struggling writers, along with widespread belief that the novels they produce should be good in all ways, moral and artistic. In particular, every author I've spoken to agrees that marginalized people must be represented in books more accurately and often than in the past. It is something they have more reason to care about than most, since young people, on average, are more liberal and less white than the general population in both the US and the UK. It is also natural to write more cautiously when about half of the people reading will be children. The YA category is still a teenager itself, with origins in the Harry Potter years at the beginning of the century. The first big identity discussion took place in 2012 when the film The Hunger Games surprised some loyal but inattentive readers with the news that 2 of the main characters were black. In May 2014, a new fan convention in New York called BookCon announced an all-male, all-white panel for Blockbuster Reads event, and We Need Diverse Books grew out of the protest that followed. In September 2015, Corijn Duivis, a Dutch YA author, proposed the Twitter label #OwnVoice to promote books in which the protagonist and author share a marginalized identity. I've always hated that hashtag. It's such garbage. It has since become a kind of quality assurance mark for many campaigners, since it means that the book will help diversify both the character and the authors in YA fiction. while guaranteeing that the author knows what life with the character's identity is like. But clearly that didn't matter in Amelia Zhao's case, because she wrote about the Chinese slave trade being a Chinese immigrant and they still went after her. She used hashtag own voice and they still called her a racist because she didn't consider black people in the Asian slave trade. So hashtag own voice doesn't even matter. Marginalization of people doesn't matter. You have to focus on the correct kind of marginalization and to present the correct kind of marginalization, or it doesn't count. That's what I'm getting from this. In autumn of 2015, Kirkus began a policy of noting the skin color of major characters in children's and YA books and assigning own voice reviewers to them. Kirkus also started to provide what is called sensitivity training to its reviewers. The employment of sensitivity readers became routine in US YA publishing at the same time. I can't even imagine how many masterpieces sensitivity training is destroying. We couldn't have Monty Python today because of the sensitivity. We're going to lose out on so much good because people are afraid of engorging. Engorging? People are afraid of enraging the nuts on Twitter. Many of the battles around YA books display the worst features of what is sometimes called cancel culture. Tweets condemning anyone who even reads an accused book have been shared widely. Tweets condemning anyone who even reads an accused book have been shared widely. I have heard about publishers canceling and altering books and asking authors to issue apologies, not because either of them believed they ought to apologize, but because they feared the consequences if they didn't. Some authors feel that it is risky to even talk in public about the subject. It's potentially really serious, says someone I'll call Alex. You could get absolutely mobbed, so I can't use your real name. I would be too nervous to say that with my name to it. None of the big 3 UK publishing groups, Penguin, Random House, HarperCollins, or Hachette, was available for comment. So none of these people think they're actually doing anything wrong, but they're afraid of the mobs on Twitter being able to have some kind of control over them. Dude, you are inflating a monster under the bed that's not there. You're seeing a shadow of a stuffed animal under the bed and thinking that it's this huge thing. If you just ignored these people, you would be fine. What is the use of an apology if you don't even feel bad? Like, an apology is an admission of guilt. It also kind of makes the nuts feel like they have some kind of power over you. This is why it's so out of control, because nobody is willing to put their foot down and say, you're crazy, or your opinion on this actually doesn't matter. You know, there's nothing wrong with telling people that their opinions don't matter on something. Okay, you're gonna cry because my gay werewolf doesn't act the way that you think my gay werewolf should act. Boo freaking who, go write your own. Congratulations. This also touches on something that I saw yesterday, which was somebody on Twitter talking about starting a list of bigoted writers that should be blocked on Twitter, and then circulating that around. And, you know, this article right here is talking about condemning anybody who even read the accused books. How dangerous do you think it is to create targeted blacklists between people for such subjective terms as bigots? You can't even read a book that has a character who might be a little racist in it without being called a white supremacist. So what, you really want to make a list with your subjective ideas of what's a bigoted idea? You better hope that you don't have any tweets on your account that might be considered bigoted. In fact, I think your creation of a list of bigots is actually kind of a bigoted move. Another author I will call Chris is white, queer, and disabled. Chris has generally found the YA community friendly and supportive during a career spanning several books, but something changed when they announced plans for a novel about a character from another culture. Later, Chris would discover that an angry post about the book had appeared anonymously on Twitter, directing others to their website. At the time, Chris only knew that their blog and email were being flooded with up to 100 abusive messages a day. Quote, these ranged from people telling me that I was a sick pervert for tainting their story with my corrupt westernized ideas, to people saying I have no right to appropriate their culture for my own benefit and I must immediately stop work. Some emails and comments consisted of 4-letter words. There were threats of beatings and sexual assault. One message made a threat of a group coming to my house in the middle of the night and some breaking in so that they could give me a lethal overdose. Some messages came through Goodreads, and although Chris does not know if they were linked to the main YA community, the vast majority and all of the most violent threats came from an ideology that I had identified as the left. Chris says every message made the same demand. Stop writing this. Don't write this. You can't write this. You're not allowed. Chris now realizes that it would have been best to call the police. In fact, they told no one. The messages continued for about a year, during which time Chris stopped sleeping, found it hard to write, and became increasingly depressed. At last, from a mixture of financial necessity and the feeling that the punishment was already happening, Chris finished the book, which has since been published. The Tumblr post remains online. For publishers, supporting a book accused of racism could seriously harm their reputation, yet the price of withdrawing one could be enormous. Quote, "It is a topic that is discussed on a daily basis in private groups on Facebook," says an author I will call Paris, who has twice been nominated for a Carnegie Medal. This is a huge demand for books. There is a huge demand for books to be more sensitive to minority groups, but there is also concern that this is censorship. Pre-publication is the wrong way to go about it. In Paris's case, after months of debate, an entire series was withdrawn from the publisher. The books were literally going to print that morning, Paris remembers. They ended up paying for the entire series, so I got all of my advances, and it never got published. It was mind-boggling, just bizarre. Does Paris know why it was pulled? Quote, "Because the publisher was scared of Twitter."
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
They admitted this, because there are things like a racist character in the book. They were worried that people would say, "This has got a racist character, the author must be racist." The publisher was certain that the books were fine, Paris said, but felt it could not risk an accusation of racism. They're paranoid, and the sales department was second-guessing everything. They went through the books and went, "That could be misconstrued as offensive. That could be offensive. That could be offensive." The idea that sensitivity is too subjective to understand, let alone enforce, frustrates many of those who campaign for it in the YA community. Rather than being a righteous mob trying to silence other opinions, they regard themselves as simple fact checkers, providing a service that is welcome by authors. "I see sensitivity reads as a form of peer review," says one who asked not to be identified. "There are some things as a white cis straight person that I may not notice or even consider. I recall a huge moment for me was reading about black ballerinas dyeing their pointed shoes to match their skin. It's such a small thing, but I never had to think about that when I did ballet. The shoes always matched my skin." That doesn't take a sensitivity reader. That just takes doing research. You don't have to go and get a sensitivity reader to then ream your story because your story doesn't match their life. Every character is not the same. Every blind person is not going to have the same experience as other blind people. Every black person is not going to have the same experience as every other black person. And I feel like melting this down to a sensitivity reader who matches some sort of identification of one of the characters can now affirm that you are doing it correct is actually incredibly racist, because you're saying you guys fit in the same box, so you must have the same experiences. Can somebody explain to me how that is not racist or sexist or whatever the character identification code would be? Lig runs a YA Facebook group with more than 1,700 members. She says the community is much more moderate and reasonable than many outsiders have been led to believe. There is a sect of people who say any criticism is censorship. She says there are people who say you can only write a character from a certain race if you are of that race, but a lot of the conversation falls somewhere in the middle. It's really weird to me that they can demand diversity, but then the second somebody writes somebody that's not physically like them, then you've just broken the rules. But at the same time, more diversity. So if we're supposed to keep both of these rules at the same time, then it just sounds like discriminate against white people. White people aren't allowed to publish books anymore. That's what enforcing those two rules says to me. Far from being afraid of criticism, Heilig says that many writers in her group are eager for feedback on identity matters, and many writers from marginalized groups are happy to provide it without accusing anyone of anything. None of this, of course, is seen by the outside world. We care about our peers, Heilig says. We don't want to drag people. That is the worst and last option. The first thing to do is to try and help. Meanwhile, many mild racist books are still published without controversy, she believes, and some of the controversy we see has an important but hidden private context. I don't think that the fears you're talking about are born out of reality. People make this out to be so hard, but honestly, I don't think that it's difficult. What we're looking for is good writing. So you either know what the tropes are and subvert them, or break the tropes entirely. I don't understand why there is so much of a push to do the same old thing. I don't understand why there's so much of a push to try to control what other people are allowed to write. If other people want to write a trope, how is that your problem? Just don't read the book. Don't support the book. If they don't want to change that character, that's their character. I don't understand. I would never try to push somebody else to change the way that they want to write a book or a character. You know, I might, if I'm in a critique group, I might try to help them write a better book, but I'm not going to say, you can't do that. Ellen O has been reluctant to talk publicly since her tweets about Blood Heir, for which she received death threats against herself and her family. Boo-hoo. Apparently other people are getting death threats for just trying to publish their stupid books. Boo freaking who. Welcome to the internet. She reported the worst cases to the police and, in the end, deleted her social media accounts. Probably the best thing that anybody could do, honestly. Criticism is healthy, O believes, but she feels that outsiders have made things needlessly unpleasant. I wish we did not have to have these mob reactions, she says. The YA community used to be a safe place where bloggers and writers could communicate and share book news. It's become so different. There are extremes on both sides, and it's hard to find the truth among the vitriol. Mary Watson, a mixed-race author who grew up under apartheid in South Africa and now lives in Ireland, agrees, quote, I think there have been many careless and even damaging representations of people of color in books, she says. Guess what? White people also get bad guys. Like, white people also get stereotyped. Deal with it. Everybody gets it. And as a reader, I've experienced it throughout my life. I mean, let's just really quick. What do people say about those in Alabama? What do people say about those in Georgia? Everybody gets a bad rep and bad representation and generalization. Okay, just deal with it. You don't need to censor people because because where you're from or who you are gets thrown into a generalization. You deal with it like an adult. And as a reader, I've experienced it throughout my life. Sometimes it's just eye-rolling. Sometimes it makes you want to shut the book in exasperation. So I understand that there's a lot of anger about how people are represented. I absolutely get that. But the way that things have played out this year doesn't sit comfortably for me. I absolutely agree that sloppy representation should be spoken out against. But I think this should happen in ways that encourage constructive dialogue rather than cancellation. Sophia Bennett, a British author, welcomes many of the changes in YA over the past 5 years, but sees a clear line that critics should not cross. One thing that saddens me about the way that the argument is polarized on social media is how many people comment negatively, particularly on books that they haven't read. I think this is an unhealthy attitude for a readership to have. They don't want to make up their own minds based on their own experiences. There are other reasons beyond the page why the YA community might be upset right now. According to research by Melanie Ramdarshan Bold at University College London, after a period of rapid growth in the early 2000s, the number of YA books being published in the UK peaked in 2012. Since then, it has declined rapidly. In 2016, the latest year in the study, just 167 different YA authors were published in the UK, less than half of the number of 2012 and fewer than any year since 2006 when the dataset began. Overall, sales of young adult fiction fell in the US last year, and in February the bookseller revealed a very steep drop in UK sales, which are now at their lowest point for 11 years. There are many theories to explain this, including the idea that YA has become overloaded with social justice themes.
Why are we still here?
Although this was hardly a problem for The Hate U Give, a huge blockbuster by Angie Thomas, which concerns the shooting of a black teenager by a white police officer. Just because you can get away with one social justice theme does not mean that you can get away with it in every single book ever in your genre. Just so you know. The YA wars may die out in the months ahead as people grow wary of the arguments or the conflicts may appear to die out if timid publishers purge anything that they can imagine being questioned. The wars may even spread. There have been 2 pre-publication campaigns against adult novels on the basis of identity so far this year. A petition demanded the withdrawal of the Cape Doctor by E.J. Levi because of the way it handles the gender of its central character. In May, They Called Me Wyatt was canceled after the author Natasha Tynes tweeted a photograph of a black subway worker eating against the rules on a Washington, D.C. train. Tynes was widely accused of racism. At the time of writing on Goodreads, her book had received 1,970 one-star reviews. She is now suing her publisher. It may not be realistic to hope for restraint on social media, but it is clearly what's required. If authors are only human and make mistakes that need to be corrected, then critics are also human and must be ready to admit some mistakes of their own. In January, Kazuko Jackson was the authority on negative tropes in fiction. In February, he was a perpetrator, as unreliable as anybody else. Heilig herself praised A Place for Wolves on Goodreads, then later apologized for being flippant and disrespectful. Still, correction hurts, so it's always tempting to dismiss social justice warriors or the arrogant racists on either side. Ironically, it can even happen when writers argue over how to avoid stereotypes. Nothing is more normal than being wrong. And this is really why nobody should be trying to correct other people's presentation of anything. Like Kazuko Jackson writing his black gay werewolves after being a sensitivity reader and getting mad at somebody else for their presentation of whatever should be a clear sign that you will always be wrong according to somebody. Not everybody is going to like your book. Not everybody is going to like your characters in general. And it's nobody's place to shout you down and shut down your book, your career, or your creativity because they don't like the certain brand that you write. Before, I seem to remember a time when you could write anything that you wanted, and the people who liked it would pick it up, read it, talk about it, share it, and the people who didn't like it would just move on with their lives. They wouldn't try to ruin somebody else's career because you didn't write the book that they don't want to read. So, what is emboldening these people to try to ruin each other because you didn't write the book that they wanted you to read? Get ready to have your feelings hurt if you are sensitive. A lot of this to me says it is untalented people trying to coerce others who have more talent and dedication, enough dedication to sit down and write a full novel and edit a full novel, and sometimes even a series, into writing the books that they do not have the dedication or the skill or the desire to learn the skill to make. And it's the same thing that's happening with movies that are being commandeered by feminists and then changed into an all-female cast, is they don't have the skill to create their own characters. They don't have the skill or the discipline to learn how to create a great universe and to attract their own fans. And so they want to commandeer somebody else's work, somebody else who's already put in those hours, so they can make a quick buck and say, look at how amazing I am. The people who are going after all of these individuals for their creativity, their universe, their visions in their head, and their stories in their head, and their lore, are people who don't have any skill, who don't have any ability, who don't have any discipline, and they will see you as their slave to pushing their ideas across. They don't give a crap about what you think, what you believe, what your experiences are, and it shows when you can write these characters after they demand diversity, but oh wait, that character isn't like me. Well, no duh, it's not like you. I'm not going to be able to write your story. I'm going to be able to write my story. I don't think that there is any time that somebody is more honest than when they're writing, even when they're writing fiction, because everything in that fiction is going to include the bad things that they see, which could be writing their racist characters, how they interpret those racist characters, because you'll see a lot of tropes with racist characters or with religious parents. Often, I see a lot of really bad troping with the super Christian parents that want to beat their kids for being gay. I don't ever see anybody going after that trope being severely abused, but okay. You're going to put your morals in there as the backbone, but you're also going to have the opposite of what you think is immoral, because you're going to have conflict. You're going to have whatever you think the good character is struggling with against the opposite to create a conflict. The story, just let people write their freaking books, and if you don't like it, take their idea and go write it better yourself, because you can't copyright an idea.